Hello, and so we're starting our new season of the podcast. We're working with Library Journal, and part of this is to be able to expand a little bit more and talk to interesting people about interesting things and take our awesome library thingies and give them a little dimension. And my awesome library thingy for this last episode was a person, because that's what one does. And so I talked about Rebekah Cummings, who is running for lieutenant governor. I think I got that. Yes, in
That's
Utah.
right.
And which I think is awesome because not only, as we'll talk about, is she brilliant and wonderful, but also I love the idea that librarians are moving, moving to action. And so I think this
Mm.
is, well, probably not everyone's going to run for lieutenant governor, but I know a lot of people who end up on running for school boards and library boards and chambers of commerce. And so I think it's a great idea. So with that, let me just say, welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for making me your interesting library thingy.
So, all right, tell me the story. You're sitting around one day with plenty of time on your hands, no doubt, as an academic librarian, and you said, I really hope someone reaches out to me and asks me to run for higher office. How did it happen?
Oh my gosh. Well, I will say it was the complete surprise of my life. I mean, I've have not thought of myself as being a political person really until the book banning fight started, which I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But in April, I received an email from Representative Brian King's team. So my running mate, who's running for governor of Utah, Representative Brian King, he's been in the legislature for the past 16 years. He served as House Minority Leader for 8 of those years. So he's got, he's very popular in Democratic Utah circles. But his team reached out in April saying, "We're considering you for lieutenant governor. Are you interested?" And I literally had to read that email 3 times. I was like, well, maybe he wants my input on who he's going to select as a running mate. And my family and I were driving to this like hot tub expo to get a new cover. So it was all very random. But I reached back out and said, yes, I would love to be interviewed. They interviewed me like 2 days later. The next day, they asked me to join the ticket, and it has been an absolute wild ride ever since.
That's incredible. So tell me about the work that you were doing before that email, because obviously you drew some attention, and just like to tell
Mhm.
people what you were working on and sort of how you were taking the discussion around book bannings and such public.
Mhm. Sure. And I mean, like so many of us that do library advocacy, I have a day job, which is totally different from the advocacy work that I do. So I'll just say in my day job, I'm the director of digital matters at the University of Utah Marriott Library. That's like a digital humanities center. So I think you and I actually have some overlapping research interests as well. But about 7 or 8 years, I had a friend reach out to me and ask if I was interested in running for Utah Library Association president. And to be honest, at first I was like, no, I don't, I'm pretty busy. I don't think I have time for that. And my husband and I were talking about having one more child as well. But he was like, oh, it's so easy. It's like an hour a week. And I'm like, well, I could do that.
Sorry.
Um, David, it was not one
No,
hour a
it's
week.
not. No, it's not.
It was like 5 to 10 hours a week. But I threw my hat in the ring. I was elected to be president of ULA. And as I was thinking about, what I wanted my platform to be, because everyone said pick one thing, like one area you can improve the State Library Association. And I felt like we were already doing a really good job with things like professional development and creating this platform where librarians could connect. What we weren't doing as well as other states was advocacy work. I didn't feel like we had a great relationship with not just our state legislature, but with our, training our librarians to connect with their, city and county, councils, for example, or their mayors, like building those relationships with people who make decisions about library funding and library issues. And so that became the platform for the year. I recruited the world's best advocacy chair. His name's Peter Bromberg, and he has this deep interest in library advocacy. He was at the time the executive director of the Salt Lake City Public Library System, but he agreed to serve in that capacity. Peter's with every library now. And he was really kind of like a guide for us. And we just went to work building relationships with the 104 members of the legislature, trying to do mapping between librarians and their representatives and training people on how to have a bigger impact on people who make decisions that affect libraries. Now, this was back in 2018, 2019, and the timing could not have been better because, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, in 2020, along with a lot of the public school board wars that we started hearing about around mask mandates and DEI and critical race theory. A lot of you know that quote unquote porn in libraries became a big thing. And nowhere was that more true than in Utah. I mean, we often hear about Moms for Liberty, which is like the national organization that was really going after library books. In Utah, we have a group called Utah Parents United that was just actively spreading misinformation about, you know, calling librarians groomers and pedophiles, and, you know, saying that we were stocking our library shelves with, you know, pornographic material. And they really got in the ear of a lot of our legislators. And in 2022 passed a terrible bill, HB 374, that made it easier to pull library books off of shelves. In the last legislative session, they passed another bill, HB 29, which now made it where in Utah, if 3 school districts ban a book, the entire state has to pull the book from every school library. So those are the bills that have passed. But Peter and I, working with ULA and with the School Library Association, worked really hard to make the bad library bills better or to like stop them altogether. In 2022, we co-founded a group called Let Utah Read, and it was our attempt to organize in opposition to Utah Parents United. We now have a database of over 6,000 Utahns that we can activate to show up at public school board meetings or at the state capitol when book banning issues are on the table. And it's just been an incredible journey. But, you know, like so many librarians, I care deeply about the freedom to read and kids having access to books that we know are important for them to have. So that's what got me activated politically. And that's when I connected with Representative Brian King. He actually ran a bill in the last session called HB, gosh, the numbers are 583, student access to books. And he worked with me on some of the language of that bill. And that's how we got to know each other a little bit better. And then when he had to pick a running mate, he reached out and asked if I was interested. Sorry for that extremely long answer.
Well, it's a brilliant answer because, you know, I think a lot of us, all of us in the profession are concerned about book banning. And, you know, even early on in the process in 2020s and as these things were happening, there was a lot of, well, what do I do about it? And how do I do about it? So having someone who moved beyond that sort of point and then created mechanisms for others to participate is extremely impressive. So I have this theory. You tell me, and since I've said it out loud in public, you are welcome to now correct it in public. I kind of say we're at the end of the beginning of the book banning debate. And what I mean by that is not that the book banning debate is gone by any means, but it's a new phase, right? The first phase was, wait, we're librarians, you can't say this about us, and trying some, you know, we're all objective and perfectly neutral, and all these sort of old arguments we had didn't work for a while. And the parents' rights argument was a very strong argument and is in essence a trap, right? It's the, you know, you do have a right as a parent not to expose your children to this material. And the response then is, but it's okay for these other kids to see pornography. So, you know, I look at the work that you've done, that Peter's done, that every library's done, and ALA has come around, is, you know, I think we're in a much stronger position because we've learned and we've gathered data and we have databases of people, et cetera. So that was a very bad academic way of asking a question, wasn't it? Which was to make a big pronouncement at the end going, right?
You know, are we turning the corner? I mean, is that...
Well, I don't know if we're turning the corner because it's a fight, but I feel like we're much better aware of and equipped to have the fight now, I guess. Is that a fair?
Yes, actually, that's a great way to put it, because I do think a lot of us were, despite the fact that almost all of us probably took ethics classes when we were in library school, and we had been steeped in principles, you know, against censorship and defending the right to read. I don't think we'd had to put it into practice for most of our time as librarians, and so they were sort of these like. I mean, it felt philosophical, right? It didn't feel like we were really having to defend the right to read. And I say that knowing that there have always been some book challenges, but mostly probably more in good faith. You know, something I talk about is when I used to work at a public library, we did occasionally get book challenges. This is like 15 years ago, but it was usually like one parent who read a book with their child and said, you know, I don't think this book should be in the library. And, you know, and then you would read the book, you do the evaluation process and decide, like, is it in the right place? Maybe we need to move it to YA or something. obviously this feels so different, right? These are not good faith book challenges. These are people giving lists of hundreds of books that they haven't even read because someone told them that they were pornographic. I mean, it just feels different in kind. And I think as a profession, we've really had to work at, first of all, thinking about what we do really believe in, what battles are we willing to wage? A lot of these are political in nature. I've seen people give ground I don't think they should give over intellectual freedom. And at other times, I'm understanding of, look, they're just trying to keep their library open against, with a hostile board or board takeovers, which we've seen as well. But I think that we've also developed messaging around it. We're learning what the law actually says, which is really important. A lot of the training that Peter and I did early was training librarians in like, what has the Supreme Court said about the right to read? Do students actually have a constitutional right to read? How do we define pornography? This is something that has an actual legal definition. It's not just a term people can throw out. How should we be evaluating literature? And anyway, I think we, as a profession, we've learned a lot. We've learned about organizing. We've learned what messaging works and what messaging doesn't. And that's different if you live in a red state versus a blue state. I do think but the optimistic part of me thinks this has been a great opportunity for us to live into our values and figure out how we can really, be like the best librarians and serve our communities the best we can. But it has not been easy. That's for sure.
Changing passive support to active support is always hard. I'm also, once again, as someone in the middle of this, it seems like, it's moved out of the sort of loud local, even if folks were coming in from outside it, but it was still sort of wrestled around in council chambers and such. Then it moved very much into the legislative world where we're seeing these laws passed. But it seems like we're also seeing a shift in those laws, which is the original ones were more or less, we can ban these books and 3 books get right. There was sort of like how to take books out. But it seems like the current proposed laws in places like Arkansas, the one that didn't pass in Georgia, I anticipate in Texas, are starting to look at, things like making it illegal to pay funds to the American Library Association, talking about taking away affirmative defenses from librarians in obscenity cases, talking about criminalizing some of these factors, right? It seems like it's getting the stakes are being raised.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember being in Montana last summer when the Montana State Library, I think, decided that they would not fund any dues or any trainings, anything from the American Library Association. And it was based off the flimsiest of evidence. It was like one tongue-in-cheek tweet from Emily Drabinski from 2 years ago,
Right.
Making a joke to her mom. But they used that to paint ALA as a Marxist organization, or and then made this like tenuous connection to their state constitution, saying they couldn't fund a Marxist organization. I mean, we saw how it started to play out, and that happened, I think, in 5 or 6 states. And I gave a presentation last year. It's so funny how long ago that seems now, but talking about the last time we had any kind of mass exodus from ALA, where we had, multiple states at once, was over segregation, like 70 or 80 years ago. And so it was interesting to see, how unusual this was. It does seem like that kind of died down a little bit, which is good. But then, of course, what we're going to notice with, just like we do in our collection development, we start policing ourselves, right? Because we start to live in fear of what some of the far right legislators will do, or what, these kind of more fringe parental groups will say. And that's scary as well. And I'm, at this point, almost more concerned about self-censorship within the library profession than I am about, external forces.
Interesting. So let me switch topics on you, if I may, because one of the things that makes your case an exceptional case is it's one thing to say, I see this and I'm going to take action as an advocate. It's one thing to say, I'm going to take on this leadership role in a library association. It's quite another thing to say, I'm going to enter into general political election systems, right? So what was that process like? Thinking about, am I, Now, because now when I'm on the, I'm guessing when you're out on campaigning mode, it's not, let's talk about book bans. It turns into
Mhm.
also things of all these other issues from taxations to other types of rights to et
Right.
cetera. So start
Absolutely. Let's
start
talk
with
about everything.
start with the decision, and then I kind of want to hear what your life is like now. But start with that decision.
Oh my goodness, that's such a great question. And you're right. It's so different. I mean, being an advocate for kind of a one, I mean, it's a broad topic, libraries, but being an advocate for libraries is really different than running for public office, where, I mean, I feel like every day I'm just doing a crash course on all kinds of things. I mean, thankfully, like most librarians, I'm pretty well read. I've always stayed pretty well informed. So it's not like I'm starting from zero. But it's hard. And I did not, like most people running for office, make the decision to throw my hat in the ring. Although I had already had some conversations with my husband of saying, you know, I'm really enjoying this political work. It's exhilarating to realize you can make a difference. You know, a lot of us don't realize when we're just living our lives that our representatives are real people that you can go talk to, especially in a smaller state like Utah. I was surprised when I first reached out to my representatives. They responded right away and said, "Hi, I'm a constituent. I care about libraries. Can we talk?" And I think a lot of Utah librarians have had similar experiences that when you reach out to people in your legislature or city council or whatever, they're happy to hear what libraries are doing in their communities and to have you lend your expertise if you're saying, "Hey, let me tell you about our policies and why we care about what we do." So that was really exciting to realize not only could I make a difference in my library, which has always been the reason I love librarianship, but realizing you can make a positive change for libraries statewide. So I had said to my husband, maybe someday I'll think about running for school board or city council, but our kids are still relatively small. My little ones are 6 and 8. And then I have a 19-year-old also, and I have a full-time job, and that's so busy. So I didn't think now was the time. But when Brian reached out and said, we're considering you for lieutenant governor. I mean, first of all, that just felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Right.
Who gets to run for lieutenant governor and go to every inch of the state and talk about the things you care about? I mean, for me, that's just not just library books, but talking about education and clean air and saving the Great Salt Lake and, all these different reproductive rights. I mean, there's so many things in Utah that are under attack. I mean, this last legislative session was particularly painful. We saw a DEI ban, book banning, trans bathroom bills. I mean, it was just like an onslaught of culture war issues so when Brian asked me, I was like, yes, I'd love to be a part of this. I think you had asked me about like what my life looks like
Yeah.
on the
Yeah. What's
campaign
it?
trail.
So we should tell listeners you're on a sabbatical. So
Yes.
you didn't start on a sabbatical, but you're currently on a sabbatical looking. So
Mhm.
that gives you some time to work on this. So you're not taking away from other job duties and such. But once again, so I talked to some really brilliant librarians. I'm saying, hey, have you seen what Rebecca's doing and the idea that it's accessible? And you're not the first one to tell me that. Well, we started working, talking to representatives, and it's really interesting because they're real people and real things can get done at a real scale. All right.
Mhm.
So, okay, I've now got my lineup. I've got, the 30 librarians who are ready to run for office.
Mhm.
What's that look like?
Okay. Yeah. And obviously it would look a lot different if you're running in a local race than
Sure.
running in a statewide election the way that Brian and I
Yeah, but
are.
I know you didn't have a chance to be, the vice president position, but anyway,
Yeah.
so we'll just start with the state for
Yeah.
now.
Totally. And I'm working really closely with all of our down ballot candidates. So, I've had 6 great months of conversations with them as well, like hearing about what it's like for them to run in their house districts or for whatever, whatever thing they're running for. So the hardest single thing about running for office is you have to raise money.
Hmm.
I hate it so much, David. In the library, we very rarely have to ask anybody for money, and I am realizing it's part of the appeal of this job. As a candidate, I mean, 10 hours a week, I just make phone calls asking people for money and saying, I'm Rebekah Cummings. I'm running for lieutenant governor. Here's the reason why this is the most competitive governor's race we've had in 40 years in the state of Utah, talking about what a great candidate Brian is, and then making the pitch. Can you help us out and chip in? Blah, blah, blah. That's pretty tricky. Almost every night of the week, we have events, whether they be fundraising events, meet and greet events, or, I canvass every single Saturday to help down ballot candidates. That's just knocking on doors and talking to people and finding out what they care about. Um, It's lots of media, which has, thankfully, I had gotten some media training through the book banning fight, but being prepared to talk about any issue is a whole different thing. Tons of imposter syndrome. Oh my gosh, like it's but thankfully I have a running mate, which helps. I get to run with Brian King, who has been in office for 16 years, so he's just this calm, steady presence and very affirming and wonderful to run with. We have a great team. So here's another difference. If someone chooses to run for city council, they probably don't have like a big team to support them. Running a statewide race, we've got our campaign strategy team, we have our fundraising team, we have a social media team. So in some ways, maybe I even have a little easier because I have so much counsel I can rely on. I don't know how I would have done this if I weren't on sabbatical, because it really has felt like a full-time job. But I say that, and I know lots of people with full-time jobs that are running for something right now. So somehow, we make it work. I do think there's probably some degree of privilege, though, running for office. So you probably have a flexible job that lets you step away to do different things. Librarianship, too, is interesting because most of us get paid from public funds. So you have to be very clear in the distinction between, the day that I agreed to run for office, I had a really important meeting with my dean saying, okay, you cannot use any library, can't use your library email, can't use your library computer, can't use, the different resources of the institution, which I hadn't really thought about, but we've tried really hard to have that separation. Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, so before I ask you when, your future in politics, but I'm curious once again that if what we do, so Peter's your chair, and Peter is amazing, and every library is amazing. The idea of librarians being more politically active, and that means
Mhm.
not just in terms of advocacy, but actually seeking political office. It's an interesting.
Mhm.
What structures do we need to put in place as a profession to
Mhm.
support that, or should we be supporting that? Should they call it, just like when we talked about, trying to get more women in the Senate, more women in the Congress? Is this something where we should be fighting to get more librarians in state houses?
Well, I will tell you my personal opinion that I would love to see, and I'm going to broaden it. Teachers and librarians, I think we need a lot more of them in state houses. My heart is cheering when I hear Tim Walz talk about being a social studies teacher and then running for, different offices and now
Yes.
vice president. But I just feel like we do not have enough public servants running for public office. And at first it felt interesting to me, like, oh, a librarian running for lieutenant governor. But the longer I am on the campaign trail, I realize the skills that we develop as librarians are actually perfectly suited for running for office. I mean, what do we do every day? We listen to people and then we help them be successful in whatever way they need to be successful or want to be successful. I think just your typical reference interview of like really getting at the heart of what someone needs and what they're looking for, and then helping connect them to that. Gosh, if all of our politicians had that mindset, I feel like our society and our government would be far more functional. Um, I think as librarians, though, we don't tend to think of ourselves as being, I mean, at work actively, right? I mean, that brings up the question of neutrality, that we're always supposed to be neutral. Although we know we're not neutral about things related to libraries or our values, we're not neutral about access to information or censorship or even being a force for good in our communities. I mean, we're not neutral about kids having, well, I'm thinking of my public library that offered, free snacks after school and lunches in the summertime because we saw our kids were hungry, and we're not neutral about their hunger. I think there's a lot of issues like that where we also work with so many different communities. It's something that I talk about in my stump speech, that I work in an academic library now. I used to work in a public library, but that's given me a chance to work with students and families and veterans and unsheltered populations and LGBTQ youth, and that broad range of getting to meet the needs of different populations. It's pretty rare actually in most professions. And so I wish we had more librarians that cared deeply, take the skills they already have and then put it into politics. I think we'd be so much better off.
Oh, so this is my huge takeaway, which is, as a library professor, I need to be preparing more librarians to run for office. No, but that idea, I mean, no, it's when you say it out loud, it's perfect, makes perfect sense, which is, who else is engaged on a daily basis with a community trying to improve their lives?
Mhm.
and that needs political support as well as financial support and information support and things like that too. All right.
Mhm.
So here's you've been so generous with your time, but I do have to ask this question because it's the one I always love asking when the reporter, and I'm clearly not one, asks the politician. It's like, so, Lieutenant Governor, is it, you have ideas for it going beyond that? Is this a switch to
Mm.
politics, and whether, sure you'll be elected and then keep going?
That's such a good question. And it's one I truly do not know the answer to. So, David, I'll tell you, I am sitting in my office right now and I have a poster that you can't see because it's behind my laptop. But back in the pandemic, when we were severely understaffed and I was working on boundaries, I put this poster up. It's from the book Essentialism, but it says, Rebekah, before you say yes, are you deeply inspired by this work? Does it tap into your particular talents? Does it meet a significant need in the world? And if the answer to any of these is no, the answer is no. This is not your work. And that became amazing criteria for me to decide, do I want to say yes to this or do I want to say no to this? When I was asked to run for lieutenant governor, I cannot remember any time in my life where every bit of me was saying yes. I wanted to do it. I felt like I could make an impact. I knew it'd be a great learning opportunity. And I am so inspired by it. Like, I'm inspired by my team. I'm inspired by Brian. Our state, I love Utah so much, but we have gotten so extreme and so far to the right. And just the opportunity to bring some balance back to Utah government was, I'm deeply passionate about, not to mention the things that we need to solve here that a Democratic governor would be great for. So I bring this up for future things. If I ever feel like that again, I'll say yes. If I don't, I'll say no. If people have already brought up some opportunities that I'm less excited about, I love my day job so much. I mean, like I said, I'm the director of a digital humanities center. We get to think about really cool social and ethical implications of technologies like AI and social media, which also, by the way, more people in government should know about. Um, I'm sure you know.
It's an idea.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So if another exciting opportunity comes up, I would say yes. And it's also nice to know my family will rally around and support. My husband's been amazing. My 19-year-old son's been so helpful with the little ones. The grandparents have been great. Because for us, another privilege I have is I have a great village, that's stepped up to do what really needed to be done while I'm out hitting the campaign trail.
Well, Rebekah Cummings, I'm thinking it's too late for us all to move to Utah to vote for you, unfortunately. I think we don't register in time, but um, it's been thank you for taking this time. It's inspirational, and once again, um, it really that connection between if we're looking to change the world with every people individual, there are multiple places where those talents can be, and the political arena is one, whether we're advocating for, participating, or becoming part of that system. And so thank you, and thank you for running, and thank you for all the work you did as president of the association, and thank you for the voice that you continue to provide.
Oh, thank you, David. This has been such a treat. I appreciate you just amplifying our campaign and encouraging more librarians to run. Because more than anything, I hope that's your takeaway. And if any librarian is listening to this and wants to chat about their aspirations to run, seriously, just reach out on LinkedIn or through my email or whatever. I'd love to talk to you.
Great. Thanks again.
Thanks.